Could being creative cause us to reach for that extra donut, pour a stronger cocktail, or even skip out on a workout? New research uncovers a fascinating link between creativity and indulgence. Is creativity fueling a hidden urge to make less healthy choices? Today, we're joined by Jack Goncalo, Professor of Business Administration at Gies College of Business. The paper is called Creative Ideation Activates Disinhibited Reward-Seeking and Indulgent Choices. It's published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. Jack, this paper links creative work with indulgent behaviors. That could include eating more junk food, building cocktails with higher alcohol content, or opting for less intense workouts. First of all, what led you to explore this connection between creativity and indulgence?
Well, it was actually a rejection from a journal, oddly enough, where they said, we're not interested in publishing papers on the antecedents of creativity. And that was what I had spent the first 20 years of my career doing research on, which is we know we want creative ideas. How do we get people to think more creatively, collaborate more creatively? And I thought, well, what about the consequences of creativity? What do we know about that? What if we make people be creative and then look at what happens next? And most of the research on creativity is really focused on what makes people more creative. But once the creative act is complete, what happens next? What does it change the way people think in ways that will shape future decisions? And so that set my colleagues and I down a new line of research looking at just that. So what we do is manipulate certain conditions and then see what makes people generate more ideas. But this stream really flips the script, and we have people generate creative ideas, and then we see, okay, what's the next step? What happens next?
Interesting. Okay, so let's dive into this study. You did 10 experiments with more than 3,400 participants. You tested these on burgers, alcohol, and exercise. Now let's start with the burgers. Tell me how you ran this experiment, and what did you find?
Well, coincidentally, it's 2:00 and I haven't had lunch, so I'm going to get hungry as I talk about this. But the experiment was pretty straightforward. So we had people generate either creative ideas or purely practical ideas, depending on the condition to which they were randomly assigned. After we asked them to generate these creative ideas, we then gave them a hypothetical scenario. We're going to give you a huge list of ingredients that could create a burger. And what we would like you to do is make a burger that would be delicious and that you would like to eat. Each ingredient on the list was associated with a certain number of calories. And so we had them build their ideal burger. And then what we looked at was the number of calories that burger contained. And so what we found was that prompting people to be creative led them to generate burgers that had many more calories, significantly more calories than the people who were encouraged to be practical. And that effect actually held up even when we showed them the number of calories that were in each ingredient. So sometimes it's a deterrence to tell people how many calories they're consuming. The effect held regardless. So this was sort of our first step in demonstrating this effect of creativity on being self-indulgent.
So the people who engaged in the creative task, as opposed to the practical task, built burgers that had more calories. And it's not just about food. Your next study included alcohol. Tell us about this one.
Yeah, so again, the same sort of straightforward setup. We had people generate creative ideas. Then we put them in a scenario in which they were asked to generate a cocktail that they would like to consume. And we had the alcohol by volume measure for each ingredient in the cocktail. So, you can imagine a glass of wine is going to be less alcohol than a Long Island iced tea, but you can make one, so we had all these different alcoholic ingredients. And again, we looked at the amount of alcohol that was in the cocktail that they said that they would like to drink. And consistent with this indulgence finding with the big juicy burgers, the creatives also generated cocktails that had significantly more alcohol in them. So this sort of corroborated the earlier finding in a different context.
So those who completed their creative task built drinks with more alcohol content, and they also created drinks with more calories. And you even put the calories right in front of them, and they didn't care. Okay, so the third part of this study dealt with how you burn all that off, the exercise. Tell us about that one.
Yeah, that's the trifecta. So the next study, we thought, well, the first two studies involve piling stuff on, right? More alcohol, more burger ingredients. What about a situation where you're sort of avoiding something that you really don't want to do? So we thought, well, exercise fits the bill, right? Most of us have to get out and motivate ourselves to do that, and probably would rather lie on the couch than go out and run. I know there are exceptions to that. But we, again, using that straightforward setup, we had people generate creative ideas. Then we gave them a situation in which they were to propose a new exercise routine that should take about an hour and should include a number of different activities. And you can propose any activities that you want to fill that workout time. And each activity was associated with, again, a certain number of calories burned. And again, what we found was that the creatives, when given the opportunity, generated exercise routines that burned fewer calories. So the working title of this paper for the years that we were working on it was Fat, Drunk, and Lazy. But my co-authors, who are very nice people, demurred at the last minute, and we decided not to give it that title. But that's really how I think of this set of findings.
So again, those in the creative group chose the more indulgent route, creating less intense workouts. Now, taking all three of these experiments together, it's like that creative energy somehow translated into a treat-yourself mentality. And I can hear the skeptics. They're saying, okay, well, these are all hypothetical choices. This wouldn't carry over into real life. Well, you tested that too. You did another experiment where participants engaged in a creative task, and then as an extra gift for completing the survey, they were given a choice to take a pen or an apple, two non-indulgent choices, or a fun-sized packet of M&Ms or Skittles, the indulgent choice. What did you find?
Well, again, they went for the sugar. An apple is a healthier choice than the candy, and the pen is certainly doesn't have any health implications. But the people who generated creative ideas, when they were on their way out of this study, were more likely to go for the candy. So, and like you said, it was there to address a potential limitation of the other studies, which is that we were having them make hypothetical burgers, not real burgers, and so forth. And so we really wanted to extend this into a situation where people had to make a behavioral choice. And again, the findings held up. So replicated across a number of different kinds of self-control scenarios. And so we felt confident that our findings were robust.
So through this paper, you're suggesting that flexing our creative muscles makes us more likely to reach for that extra cookie, that second glass of wine, or maybe skip the workout today when I know I really should exercise. So the big question here is why? And in your paper, you mentioned the Behavioral Activation System, or BAS. Tell us what that is.
Basically, it's a mindset in which people are oriented toward rewards in their environment, as opposed to the behavioral inhibition system, which means that I'm hyper attentive to aversive things in my environment. And the connection to this behavioral activation system, really, we first started thinking about this in an earlier paper, actually, in 2015, and another one in 2018, in which we found that asking people to be creative made them feel liberated. So there was a sense of liberation from constraint. And we found in that earlier paper that if people are burdened with something like keeping a big secret, a creative outlet can actually lift that burden by making people feel liberated from that constraint. And so we thought, well, if people, this is consistent with the idea that, being creative makes people cut loose, it makes people go for what they want. And so in a 2018 sort of theory paper, we talked about and speculated about that possibly being the case. So it was really sort of piecing together findings from a number of different papers and an idea that sort of evolved over time. But essentially, the act of being creative involves crossing multiple categories. It involves divergent thinking. It involves expansive thinking. It involves overturning social conventions, breaking social norms. That kind of activity, it seems, leaves an imprint on the way people think about the world, at least briefly in our studies, that change their approach when they're put into situations where they could possibly lose self-control.
So it's like your brain's reward system that lights up when you do something novel or something that pushes boundaries. Something about being creative is flipping that switch. And that makes sense. If you're mentally pushing boundaries and exploring unconventional ideas, maybe it's natural to seek a reward afterwards. And you believe you found a causal effect with the BAS on indulgent eating choices. How'd you test that?
We primed or manipulated it directly in an experiment in which we asked people a series of questions to recall a time when they were in that state. And so we sort of led them through, I don't know if I want to call it a prime, but an experimental manipulation in which we cued one set of participants to be in this BAS mentality compared to a control in which we asked them to think about a neutral topic. And again, we found that the BAS directly predicted these indulgent choices. And so it was just further evidence that this BAS orientation is mediating the findings that were coming up in our earlier studies.
Now, some listeners may know there has been some other research done on what we call the dark side of creativity, how creative people can sometimes exhibit negative traits. Do you think this research adds to that conversation?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot more work to be done. So we're not the first to look at the consequences of being creative. So there's a paper looking at how creative people are prone to lying and cheating and being dishonest. For one, there's early personality research looking at socially negative traits associated with being creative, like being competitive, egotistical, cynical. But there are also positives. So I think that creativity might have dark consequences, but they're not all dark. And so I talked about how having a creative outlet could feel unburdening to some people, liberating in a sense that I'm unburdened from this psychological constraint. That's positive. We have another paper that shows that being creative feels like an act of self-disclosure. So I feel like I'm sharing a piece of myself with somebody and thereby allowing them to get to know me. Not necessarily like me, but get to know me. And so it can be a foundation for building connections between people, possibly reducing loneliness. I have another a project currently with a former PhD student here at Gies, Sohoon Kim, and Maria Rodas, who's in marketing. We're looking at how being creative for consumers can build self-brand connection. So if I'm creative for a brand, so there's a lot of crowdsourcing of ideas, and for instance, Lay's asking their customers to generate ideas for new potato chip flavors. Well, that's not just going to yield new potato chip flavors. What we're finding is that it actually builds a perceived connection between the individual who generates those ideas and the brand they're generating them for. And so what I see is that this paper isn't necessarily answering this question definitively, but I think it's pointing to a potentially new stream of research, or I think a wider stream of research, looking at what happens when we ask people to generate ideas. And I think so far that's really a big unknown, and it shouldn't be.
So let's talk about the big picture implications here. And let's start at the individual level. If I'm just a person who has a job that requires me to be creative on a regular basis, do you think just having this information top of mind would be enough to entice me to make better life choices?
The one result that I think would point against that maybe is the fact that we told people how many calories were in their ingredients, right? And we told people how much alcohol they were consuming, and they did it anyway. So the question is mere awareness enough, or is this going to have to be, how do we sort of mute the effect or reverse it or make it go away? I don't know, based on what we've done so far. I also don't know how long these effects last. So it could be that I generate ideas in my office, and maybe if there's a burger on my desk, I'll go for it. But when I leave and go home, it's not clear if it carries over to different contexts. So there's a lot we still need to know about how this works, but I'm not so sure that mere awareness is going to do it, to be honest. Maybe it's more harmless than we're making it sound. So what if you have an extra burger patty on your burger after you just came up with a great idea? I mean, is that so terrible? I mean, the other question is this a chronic behavior? Am I going to start having burgers at every meal? Is this just something that I'm prone to do impulsively immediately after doing something creative? There's so much that we can look at in future research to sort through these things.
What about for the head of an organization or a department who has employees who engage in creative tasks on a regular basis? What should those leaders take away from this study?
It may seem innocuous to tell your employees to be creative, and there is a general bias such that we automatically think that creativity and creative ideas are a source of genius and progress and are profitable, are inherently valuable, but there may be consequences that we're only starting to figure out, and they may not all be positive. And so the request to put people into a creative mindset, particularly over an extended period of time and repeatedly as part of their job, might have consequences for employee health that we really should consider. And it's not a free kind of ask, that there are probably psychological costs involved in some way, and we're just starting to sort of figure this out.
It's amazing, with all that we know today, we're still discovering new things about the human mind and how it influences our behaviors. It's like we've just only scratched the surface of this connection to creativity, and I know you'll keep watching it. That was Professor of Business Administration Jack Goncalo. The paper is called Creative Ideation Activates Disinhibited Reward-Seeking and Indulgent Choices. You can read more about this and other research from the college at giesbusiness.illinois.edu.